Okay, welcome. It's a few minutes after 7, but I think we're just about ready to go. And the last conversations are ended. Thank you very much. I'd like to call this meeting of the Council of the District of Sechelt to order. It's Wednesday, March 15th, 2017, and it's just 3 minutes after 7 p.m. So the first after call to order, of course, is always a reminder to councillors if there is any conflict of interest that arises from issues we're dealing with tonight to identify that and recuse yourself at the appropriate time. And then I move to adoption of the agenda as circulated. Councillor Seegers and Councillor Wright moving adoption of the agenda. Any additions or deletions? This is, mine isn't amended.
There is an amended one, but I don't have anything in mine.
What was the amendment that was circulated?
This here is taken out.
So there's the label, the reference to second and third.
Yes, yeah. So 8.1C is dropped, the zoning amendment bylaw.
No,
It's not? Just the title?
Accidentally says there's consideration of second and third, but in fact, there is no second and third, so it's literally just delete the title.
Okay,
The report, everything is fine, it's just not on the agenda for consideration of second and third.
okay. Which is why we don't all have different agendas, because the order paper stays exactly the same except for the line directly under number 8, bylaws, for second and third reading. Okay.
Move it to amended agenda.
Yes. So the motion is for an amended agenda. Any other additions or deletions? Seeing none from staff or council, all those in favor? Thank you, that's carried. And there are no appointments or delegations this evening, and surprisingly, no proclamations. And so we move to item 5.1, which is the adoption of the minutes of the 4 p.m. regular council of meeting. Sorry, it's a 3 p.m. Another slight change in the order paper. 3 p.m. Meeting of Wednesday, March 1st. Motion to adopt. Thank you, Councillor Lutz, Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? That's carried, and there's no errors or omissions or business arising from that. So we move to item 5.2, minutes of the 7 p.m. regular council meeting of March 1st. Motion to receive and adopt. Councillor Seegers and Councillor Lutz, I see. Thank you. Any errors or omissions in those minutes? This is on page 5 through to 18. Seeing no errors or omissions, all those in favor of adoption? That's carried, and I'd ask if there's any business arising from those minutes. Just a note to staff, would you remind me there was some business arising from the finance minutes of last week that I forgot this afternoon. I'd like to come back and ask you about. And item 7.1, minutes of the March 8th, 2017 Finance, Culture and Economic Development Committee meeting. This is actually came back to finance today, but today it's for endorsement by council. Thank you, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Lutz, for recommending receipt and endorsement. Any errors or omissions? Any items that need to be pulled out of that sequence? Councillor Seegers?
Thank you. There were a couple of changes that we put forward this afternoon. Can those be reflected in these minutes?
Yes, that's a good way of doing it. Some of the grammar, which is now on page 25, for example. Things that were reflected this afternoon. Any of the resolutions need to be pulled out, or are we willing to endorse recommendations? One through 9, is it? Five. 1 through 5. Motion, Councillor, to adopt motions, recommendations 1 through 5 as motions of council. Councillor Seegers, Councillor Wright. Any discussion of any of those? All those in favor? Thank you. That's carried as well. We might be going for the shortest council meeting in the history of the district, not just of this council. However, the next item is of very real importance, and it will take some discussion. Even before we started, staff were talking to me about it, so let's take it slowly. 8.1, which is a report from the interim community planner on the zoning bylaw number 25, 1987. First, a motion to receive the report. Councillor Seegers, and I see Councillor Shanks. All those in favor? And we'll turn it to Mr. Thompson for his first report of the night.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is a relatively brief report highlighting some changes proposed by the applicant, RTC Properties, for their application for zoning amendment. Following the previous council direction, they looked at amending their proposal by reducing the maximum height in the subzone A of the CD zone to a maximum of 13.5 meters, which is only 3 meters higher than what is currently allowed on the site in the single family zone. So that would roughly translate into a 4-story building. As well, in this proposed change, there is a addition of a new definition to the zoning bylaw for building width, and then it also sets a maximum building width for the subzone A. This was done to essentially ensure that the massing is broken up and that it does not create a large wall along the frontage of the building, so, as well as there is a minimum setback between buildings, so that there would have to be massing broken up along that the frontage along Highway 101. So those are the kind of the major changes of the proposed bylaw. There's also there's also just the slight text amendments that were mentioned in the previous reports. Those did carry over the new bylaw schedule and and the reduction in the setback towards Highway 101. So that is what was based on those changes. Tonight we do have recommendation in front to proceed to public hearing as altered. However, there has been new information that has come from the applicant after the writing of this report that also stated that they're willing to look at reducing the total number of units. So if council wishes, they could look at amending the bylaw prior to going to public hearing, altering it further, or they could look at altering it after the bylaw goes to public hearing. Both are reasonable paths. So either my recommendation number 2 or option 1 could be reasonable in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And could you just clarify, if we were to amend it this evening, then when we went to page 38, Schedule B, to the bylaw, the density would be the number of dwelling units shall not exceed X number of units. It's page 38 of our agenda, page 4 of your report.
Okay. Second. So if we were to look at reducing the density, essentially that density section would have to be adjusted, and it's not something you do quite on the fly. The base density would probably be adjusted, and the density bonusing would have to be looked at as well. So
okay. I think your key comment was it's not something that should be done on the fly.
that's right.
Okay. I'll add one more question, but I'll look to council for their comments at this stage. Councillor Inkster and then Councillor Wright.
Thank you. I just see in here there's a number of just discussion points. One is that there's not a lot of clarity in looking at the document again, and the plan itself about form and character. I've mentioned this a number of months ago when we talked about this particular development as to what I was not wanting to see when it came forward. There was some argument then, or some I would say, some discussion that the original plan, the look that was given to us, wouldn't be the final piece, and it was. So once again, I just want to identify that we see the diagrams here, but there's no discussion of form and character right away that's a flag, because we want to see what it looks like, and I always want to see what the final product looks like. But in terms of that issue and some others that are presented here, the preferred route for me to make this more comfortable and to give the public more opportunity and for council more opportunities to have this particular issue go through planning, if in fact it should go back through planning, for some discussion at that table with the members, have public, not necessarily, the public would see the information and then could comment on it. And then if it comes back after planning, if it moves forward, then to go to us for consideration of public hearing, to hear more public commentary on this. This is a really important piece of land, another important piece of waterfront land, and I think we need to take the time to get it right. So I would really prefer that it goes that route rather than come to here for us to pass it or move it forward to public hearing.
Thank you. 2 points there. On the second point, staff recommendations are, once it's received at the council table, it stays at the council table for consideration and revisions, as opposed to being referred back to a committee. We could refer it to a committee, but that's unusual because it's now at our table and it's for us to deal with. Your first point, however, this is a comprehensive development zone, so I look to the planner to follow up on Councillor Inkster's notion of where form and character or building actually comes into play when it's a comprehensive development zone. Do we wait for the development permit approval, or is it in fact part of the comprehensive development zone, which provides a specific project for that zone?
Your Worship, the development permit does set the ultimate form and character, and passed by previous council resolution, having the development permit approved prior to final adoption of the bylaw has already been set as a condition of adoption. The CD zone can do a lot of things related to form and character in terms of siting and massing. Of course, nothing related to like materials or anything like that. This CD zone was designed to provide a large amount of flexibility. If in my experience, there has highly prescriptive CD zones sometimes don't allow for degrees of change that can come with quickly shaping markets. So providing the developer with a little bit of flexibility of this building could be shifted 5 meters to the left or right is kind of what I was going with, as well as keeping the units flexible throughout development. So looking at the same maximum number of units, but having those units be able to be shifted between the zones to meet unit sizes. So this CD zone was designed to provide that level of flexibility. It could be more prescriptive. There are ways it could be improved if that is council's desire in that direction, but it doesn't need to be more prescriptive.
Okay, thank you for that explanation, and I think we all appreciate flexibility. However, in this particular case, the flexibility may be coming into conflict with the neighborhood and residential concerns about exactly what's coming down. I saw Councillor Wright next.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. Just a question to you before I start. Did I hear you correctly that once council's received this, we cannot refer it back to staff?
We can, but it's unusual, so staff would normally keep it. We can refer it to staff, but it'll come back to council.
Okay, thank you.
We were saying it won't go back to a committee.
Okay.
It won't go back to the planning committee or
All right,
it'll
thank
stay
you.
at the council level. But yes, it can go back and forth to staff as
Okay,
many
you.
times as it needs.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, for that clarity. I guess the difficulty I have with this report now is that now I find out that the number of units and the density has changed on this property, and I don't know what the new density is, and I'm not prepared to make changes to it on the fly. And I would suspect that we need to send this back so that staff can have a look at this and send this report back to us the way it's supposed to be done. We've had a number of discussions amongst the council members here about accepting reports late and accepting amended reports and having them put down in front of us 5 minutes before we have to make a decision, or an hour before we have to make a decision. And I'm going to take a stand on this one, refer this one back to staff, and I'll make that motion.
Is there a seconder to the motion to refer? Councillor Mueller. Can't be debated. It is a motion to refer. I'm correct on that? Am I? The motion to refer can't usually be debated?
Technically, under Robert's rules, it's that a deferral motion can't be debated. Referral, if that's been the culture here, then,
No,
you know,
that's
we'd
fine.
accept that.
Referral is
but
different. Okay.
Deferral is actually what can't be discussed.
Any discussion of this item of referral? And I see Councillor
Yeah, I mean,
Mueller
my
first.
first inclination when I saw that, realized that this change was coming, which was 5 minutes ago, was that this would be pulled from the agenda or referred, whatever your language would be, because there's a lot that we need to know. And it's not, it just, in our process, we don't make decisions like that. So I think that that's probably the most prudent course of action. And yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And Councillor Shanks, I think, was.
Yeah. just
Councillor Inkster is next, sorry.
Reach for the top.
Have the reach before the
Yeah,
Yeah, not this time.
on the motion to refer.
Speaking to that motion, if in fact that's what we have to do, if in fact it's unusual to not go back to planning, as you're saying, although I would argue that this is an unusual situation, an unusual piece of property, so it may need an unusual process. That means planning. I will support the motion to go back to staff, although I'm worried and or warning that if it comes back with a particular plan and or buildings without some clear ideas about form and character, then where do we go from there? So I know staff hears us when we speak at these meetings, but because of the way that it has to go back to staff on this and how this has come forward, and the fact that it's an important piece and it won't go back to planning and or necessarily it can't get to public hearing for public input, I'm going to have some concerns going forward. So I wish this process luck, but I will support it because I think it does need a second look.
Okay, it's going to staff so that when it comes forward to us and then goes to public hearing, it's in the exact form that the applicant wants and everyone wants. Councillor Shanks.
Yes, Your Worship. I'll be supporting the motion to defer or defer, I guess it is, on the basis that there are several issues that are unanswered. We've recently heard that density could change. This report doesn't address what the lot coverage will now be, and it also doesn't address the reduced parkland dedication, which will be in existence as a result of reducing the height by 2 stories. And lastly, once again, my concern about amenities. So I do have to support the motion to defer.
Thank you. And Councillor Lutz.
I too support this motion. I need to know if the reduction in density reduces the mass. I want to know about the park also. Too many questions. So I hope when that comes back to us, those will have some answers. Thanks.
And Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I'll go on another tact
On the motion to refer.
on the motion to refer. When this comes back, I'd like some clarity around public consultation that's taken place. As a special infill area, that was part of the requirements. And I don't see that information here either. Thanks.
Thank you. Just before we call the motion, one of the other issues is the clarity on what was mentioned, lot coverage. I noticed in the applicant's letter, it mentions a 10% increase from R1 from 35% to 38.5%, but the bylaw says 40%. So we want to get that as precise as possible. It sounds, everyone knows that density is coming to this lot. It seems to me that a 10% increase in footprint is probably within a reasonable grounds, and height that's very close to the R1 is probably also within reason, but there's still some things that need to be clarified. On the issue of public consultation, I may have something to say about that when we're finished the discussion. Any further discussion on council's point. And before we vote, Mr. Thompson.
Yes, Your Worship, I just could provide clarity on some of those issues brought up. The applicant is proposing the same community amenities, so the same area of park, regardless of the reduction in height of the property. So that was their most recent proposal, as well as the coverage wasn't mentioned in the report because it hasn't changed from the previous bylaw that council's seen. It still has remained at 40% coverage, which is 5% more than what's allowed under the R1 zone, which I believe allows for 35% lot coverage. So that's just why it wasn't included, because it wasn't changed.
Okay, on the applicant's letter, which is page 30 of our report, item C, near the bottom, site coverage, it says reducing the overall site coverage to approximately 38% of all buildings on the site. So I just want to make sure we're precise on that. 1 or 2 percentages will make a big difference to the community, I think, on that. So that's where I was picking the 3%, 10% impact on. All those in favor of the motion in front of us? Any opposed? That's carried. I know this seems like a delay in the process, given our history in the last 2 years on some other very complicated and contentious bylaws. I think this is a good thing, and I think that it will move it forward in a way that works best. Now, on the issue of another level of public consultation, which was addressed quite significantly by council last time, but not with a resolution. I think we need to either pass a resolution providing direction on that. But before we do, I've been thinking about this a lot because I want this to be an example of how Sechelt can resolve difficult conflicts rather than an example of Gibson's The George North. I don't want to see us end up doing exactly the wrong thing with a major development. I want to see this actually work. So I would offer the services of the District of Sechelt, in particular council and myself, in facilitating a public consultation meeting. It seems to me that in discussions I've had, not everyone actually understands what consultation is. The Supreme Court has actually commented on consultation. It's pretty clear. And some of us have some experience in that, and we might invite somebody like Bill Beamish to come and help us in a session like that. So we have if the applicants and the residents want that, we might be able to help facilitate consultation, because I don't think it's been the norm. I don't think it's happened much. We've had information, we've had public hearings, we haven't actually had public consultation as it's normally understood. Councillor Lutz.
I'll make the motion that we offer to the developer and the community that ability to meet with mayor, council, and a facilitator.
And that this would be an additional public input prior to any public hearing, which
Yes.
sort of looks at option 2 on our page 28. Councillor Inkster, is that a second? Yes. Councillor Mueller?
I have a question about that. This is the first time that we've dealt with something like this, and we do have a number of different development proposals on the table right now, and I'm just curious how that would affect if we go ahead and add an extra phase to the process or some extra resources is what it would be, how that affects the other ones, and would it become part of the overall package that we offer developers?
It's called for in the OCP, but not with any clarity that people understood what was called for. So in that sense, it's not new. As long as it takes place prior to the public hearing, it's not actually a new, it's just part of that longer public information process in the public hearing. I think that it would remain an option that could be called upon in the future, but I would see this as simply a pilot rather than a precedent. It would be something we would do, but not as a precedent that would be demanded in every case. I just want to avoid this becoming something it's not yet. Right now, I see goodwill and good intentions to everyone I talk to on all sides of this, and I want to keep that as we move forward to a decision that the council's really comfortable with. Continue.
So just to follow up to that, I think that if we do go ahead and try that out as a pilot, that maybe we look to clarify that in the future. It does seem to me like it would be a prudent thing to do. Perhaps if we go past 2 public hearings on a single item,
For example.
development, it might be very beneficial and help the community kind of work through these things in a way that's positive.
Thank you. And Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Your Worship. On the motion, is council going to be the facilitator? Could I have the motion read back to us then?
Can you read it out as it was presented? I think resources.
It was moved and seconded that the applicant and the community be offered the opportunity to meet with council and a facilitator, and further that with the understanding that this would be an additional opportunity for public consultation before another public hearing is held on this application.
My sense is that this, at the moment, couldn't be managed by staff, but there are resources on council and in the community that we could draw on at very little expense and manage a public consultation process that included the applicant and people within a reasonable limit of the area, whatever the normal planning letters are. It would not be a town hall. It would not be a public meeting. It would not be a public hearing. It would be a consultation process by those whose interests are directly impacted. Trust me on it.
Thank you. I don't remember what happened to the last person that said, trust me, okay.
It wasn't me.
No, it wasn't. With all due respect. There's no question that there are people on council who could facilitate that. And it's just the word council indicates to me council as the entire body. And if that's what we mean, I'm okay with that. If we mean people within council, I'm also okay with that. I just want it very clear as to who's going to be doing the facilitating. Because my experience is that if you have a mayor and 7 councillors being the facilitator, that's awkward.
I don't think that's envisioned in the
Okay.
wording.
Thank you.
But we're offering it, and it may not be accepted. It may be when they talk to
that's
staff,
fine.
they say, no, we don't need that. We can go forward in other ways.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. That's just an offer to move this forward in some positive way. And it does go back to staff. Staff will contact the developer as soon as possible tomorrow and try and clarify what's needed in the bylaw. And by then we'll have a chance to amplify what was discussed in this last motion. Moving then to business items, item 10.1, which is page 42, request for decision. First, a motion to receive the report from the communications manager, Councillor Lutz and Councillor Seegers. All those in favor? And that's carried. And turn your microphone on. We'll ask Ms. Jordison, communications manager, to speak briefly to this report.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is bringing forward a bit of a dilemma that I faced and looking for council's direction on this. We had a citizen satisfaction survey conducted by Innovative Research Group in November of 2016. Council received the results of that survey, which were presented with statistical significance to the December 14th Finance Committee meeting, and the recommendation to receive those was endorsed by Council on December 21st. In an effort to expand the survey reach and to provide more opportunities for citizens to provide input, we also made the survey containing the same questions available online after the telephone survey was completed. The online survey was available from November 22nd to December 2nd, and the online responses were compared with the statistical verified results of the telephone survey, and considerable variations were identified in at least 13 of the 26 survey questions. Given that there was a difference between the two surveys, we did not go ahead with publishing the results of the online survey until we could take a little bit better look at the results and about how the results were submitted. When we looked at the controls on the online version, it pointed out a number of weaknesses, weaknesses in IP tracking, and the fact that the survey respondents were allowed to self-select on the demographic information resulted in the online results not being able to be confirmed with any scientific accuracy. In hindsight, it was an error on the part of staff to put forward an online version of a survey that we couldn't statistically verify when we already had statistical verifiable results from the telephone survey. Putting forward two different survey results that have quite a variation between the two results, it certainly isn't supportable. It calls into question the results of the online survey, and we'd be putting out information that we just can't verify. Because of that, I'd say staff haven't gone forward with posting those results. They are available. We could post them, but we're recommending that we thank the community for their input, and we make the admission that the online survey was not a verifiable survey. We could also post the results of the online version of the citizen satisfaction survey, but if we do that, we're recommending that it be done with a statement that identifies that the demographic data cannot be verified or weighted to reflect the community composition, and that the results are released for information and not presented with any degree of scientific accuracy.
Thank you for that report. And first, can I have somebody move for discussion recommendations 2 and 3, that we not release the results and that we release a statement regarding those results? Thank you, Councillor Inkster. Second. Councillor Lutz. Discussion of this item and the problems of validity in surveys. I'm actually really in favor of online surveys. I want to get us doing more engagement with the community, but validity is pretty important to me as well. Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, this is, I think it's very difficult when you have an add-on to a previous complete survey that was done. I was very impressed with the rigor which the contractor that we hired to do that, the quality of the work that they did. The tough part about social science being that once you start and stop the capture, that's it. And it's really hard then to go and add on additional ones, because as soon as you're observing a population, then the behavior starts to change. So it's very difficult. I look at the work that they did, and I think it's quite solid, and I think that this add-on was perhaps a mistake. So I support staff in what they're saying is that it's going to muddy up the results and will not give us any clearer of a picture. In future, though, we could potentially change our approach, try to incorporate some part of the online, but it has to be part of the entirety of the survey for it to be at all valid.
Thank you. And Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Do we even know if the results that we got were from residents of Sechelt?
Although we did use IP tracking, we can't confirm that. We have IP addresses. We can verify to some degree the geographic area of them, but you don't know. I could go to your house and take the survey on your IP address, and I don't live in Sechelt. Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's very, very difficult. I probably didn't realize the significance of how difficult it would be to track this when we went forward with adding this on, and that's a lesson learned for communications.
Just a follow-up.
Yes.
I think the information, whether it's residents from Sechelt or elsewhere, it's a viewpoint. So I would be in favor of putting the information, having the information available, but with the disclaimers, because it is somebody who's taken the time to give us that feedback.
Let me be very clear about this. this survey was an attempt to engage the community. It was hacked. I asked one person that I know very well to test the validity of this survey and let me know whether it was standing up. That person entered 14 responses out of 132 that were received. So that's 10%. I know that that person gave neutral to positive responses and was told that they changed their geographic location and their gender in it. They wanted to just see if it could be used. Once they realized it could be used more than once, they continued and they used it after the cutoff date. So that's 10%. We take that 10% out, which we know was neutral to positive, and the remaining 118 responses are not within 5 or 6 percentage points of the statistically valid response. It was hacked by a group of people on social media who encouraged negative responses to come in. So we have, in fact, a group of people who almost 45% said they do not like living in Sechelt, that the quality of life is, well, we know from the validity one that it's closer to 96% that think Sechelt's a great place to live, and about 4% that are negative. So the numbers are not just close, and therefore we can use. So my concern is, yes, it's a viewpoint of a group of people who hacked the survey and encouraged themselves to introduce negative responses, but introducing that into the community doesn't add anything to the discussion. It's not just a viewpoint. It is, in fact, simply a hacked survey so I don't know why why the District of Sechelt would enter that into the mix in any way that would add to our understanding of what the community wants and how they want to go. So I'd let you finish that, and then I see others that want to speak.
Okay, so you had additional information than what we had here?
I actually,
because that's not information that I had.
I saw the survey and I actually compiled all of the responses and compared them to the valid one, so I could see whether it should go forward.
Okay, so the only information I have is what's presented here. Thank you.
Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you added that additional information that I wasn't aware of. I'm a little surprised that people who potentially, because we don't know where they're from, actually, as you suggested, took the time as a group of people to, let's just say they lived here. So they took the time to talk negatively of the community in which they live. Could you imagine? But they probably still live here after they made those comments online. I mean, wow. But they still live here. That's just mean.
Well,
and inappropriate. I mean, you live here. So thanks for that additional information. It's disappointing.
Councillor Wright.
Oh, thank you, Worship. I guess it disappoints me, but doesn't surprise me that some people would try to deliberately skew the results. But I guess some people are like that. I guess this issue is on a public agenda. So for all intents and purposes, without the specifics, it's public. And I'm happy with that. So I'll support the recommendations. Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the recommendation in front of us? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you for staff. Thanks for the work on this. I mean, we really do want more engagement, and we want to find a way for online surveys to work because they're more effective and they're less expensive. One way is to create a panel in which we actually have people identify one URL address, because we had multiple people, not just the one I mentioned, but many of the respondents, there was 2 from each URL. That could be partners or people in the same house, it could be anything. But we can actually create a panel, but we want to also make sure it's anonymous. So there's one step there that's a little bit difficult that we haven't really solved and figured out how to do yet. So some way we're going to manage to do that. Ms. Jordison.
We do through the citizen self-service portal, the mysechelt.ca, allow people that are registering on that website for different district services to identify if they'd like to participate in surveys. So that's one option that we have. And we did push out the online survey to those individuals when we did this project. I've also asked our IT department and a couple of other staff members that have some expertise in this area. We're going to put together a working group to see what we can do with the resources we have on the website for online surveys. We'd like to use more of them, but unless we can ensure that we're getting quality results, we don't know whether we should be or not.
Thanks. Yeah, we don't want to make budget decisions on hacked results. We want to make budget decisions on valid ones. I was disappointed that 814 people viewed it, i.e. you pushed it out, but only 100 and some odd actually responded, so that was interesting too. Moving along, reports from councillors. I'll start on my left, if you don't mind, with Councillor Shanks, and we'll move along the table.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Not a whole lot to report. Was finally able to attend the Davis Bay, Wilson Creek, Selma Park Community Association meeting of last Wednesday, rather than attending the public hearing that did take place here. Brought up several issues, one of which was the receiving of referrals about which I knew nothing. So that particular item will be placed on our agenda. But 2 or 3 other items were brought up as well, and I indicated I would get the details on those and get back to them at their April 12th meeting. Aside from that, obviously I attended the council workshop and the FCED special council meeting today. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Engster.
Similar to Councillor Shanks, although he was in Davis Bay, we were here at the public hearing. Budget meetings, a couple important budget meetings, and to mention the seniors conference that was well organized and well attended. I guess it was a couple of Fridays ago now, the full day event. It was a good opportunity to hear about services, medical and otherwise, for the seniors in our community. And I hope that the information that was gathered there by those young and old was distributed to those that couldn't go, so that those that may need the services know of their availability, and private or public. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Your Worship. Attended 2 finance committee meetings and council workshop. Met with a couple of people regarding the Chapman Creek water supply, or the lack thereof. It was an interesting meeting. I missed that session at the band hall. I was doing interviews for the director of planning that day, and I don't know what was wrong with you guys. I came to the public hearing and then caught the tail end of Davis Bay Community Association, and that concludes my report. Got a fast car.
Yeah. Thank you for those reports, and Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I attended the March 3rd Seniors Conference. Yes, it was a full day. Great speakers. And it's really nice to see the depth that we have in our community and the caring that we have for those of, requiring that assistance. On the 7th, while I was dealing with my cold, I attended the Connecting Self-Employed Women's Advisory Team meeting. This was a meeting that had been postponed a couple of times because of snow. But we were guinea pigs at the meeting, and they ran a training by us, something that they're planning on taking out in the community. It's on gender-based training plus, so looking at awareness, and then not only becoming aware of the barriers, but then removing those barriers. So they have put out a request to the community if there's any organization that would like them to come in and do the training. It's about an hour. And they're willing to do some customization and present that to organizations. And I attended the public hearing. On the weekend, I had the opportunity to attend Elvis Rocks the Coast. Packed house, both times. And it was great to see Elvis. I mean, when he did his twirls, I couldn't understand how he could, skate in a straight line after. But what was really fun to watch was the people from the coast. The little ones just learning to skate, all the way up to some of those who are representing the coast now off coast, and how they were all incorporated. So kudos to the organization that put this together and to everybody who participated. Thanks.
Thank you. I just want to note that perhaps that gender barriers workshop would be useful for the district and some of our agencies. Yes, it just would be useful. So maybe we should keep that in mind for things close to home. Councillor Mueller.
Yes, thank you. Like the rest of council, attended a variety of meetings. I think the one I most enjoyed was the shirt sleeve session that we had. I think that was a great discussion. I would like to see more of those. Over the weekend, definitely, I think the highlight for me was watching Julia Budd bring home the World Championship in Bellator featherweight on International Women's Day. I know that a lot of people in this community have watched that, and I could just imagine the kinds of seeds that have been planted watching somebody from the coast who grew up here work so hard and get to the very top of their sport. I think that was just fantastic. Additionally, a little earlier today, I actually had a meeting with the coordinator of the Sechelt Arts Festival. She has asked council to be involved in some way in the origins, the theme that's been put on for this year's Arts and Culture Festival. I reached out to her, and I believe that she's looking for other councillors as well and members of the community that have somewhat interesting or otherwise interesting, compelling family stories to share those. So I'm going to be a part of that, and I would definitely encourage any members of the community and council to do that. Thank you.
It's good to hear that, and thanks for recalling Julia Budd's success. Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. Also attended budget meetings and the seniors conference, which was an incredible day. Great, as Councillor Seeger said, great speakers. I did miss the public hearing last week because of International Women's Day. I've always emceed the Labour Council's offering on International Women's Day. And we truly had an international evening. We had dancers from the Philippines. We had local First Nations drummers. We had the Balkan singers. We had South African xylophones. It just was really refreshing. And every one of the entertainers was a woman, which is unusual. We usually have a mix. So that was fun. Great speaker, Carrie Malman, who grew up here and as a young woman was one of the first to work as a laborer at Port Mellon to put herself through university. So it was just a really good evening. I'm sorry I missed the public hearing. I have some reading to do to get up to date, but I too enjoyed the workshop that council all attended, and that's been my 2 weeks.
Thank you very much for those reports. And if we can move to 11.2, the SCRD Board Council Representative Report. Councillor Wright.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. There were a number of meetings with the regional district. There was the infrastructure committee meeting plus the in-camera meeting. There was the round 2 of budgets. There was the planning and development committee meeting. There was a board meeting. And then I had a chance to participate in the local government TV interview show. It was interesting, there was only 4 of us at the meeting, at that particular meeting. It was a fun time. A couple reports that I will pass on to our CAO for information so that he can share them with the staff. One is invasive species. It came to one of the committee meetings, and this is exactly what the regional district is going to be doing. Budget has not been passed. We've just finished round 2 of the budget, so we'll see where that ends up in the next week or so, and I'll report back on that. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that report, and you didn't even mention that Sechelt's views on the transit expenditures was overruled by the majority of the board. It's okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. I voted against the transportation expansion. Transit operates on a deficit position each year. This year, they're going to have a $67,000 deficit. And I don't know how long you can sustain that. In fact, unless you're reaching into the taxpayer's pocket all the time, you can't. And it just makes no sense to look at expansion. We have to look at some alternative plan for public transportation that isn't going to leave us in a deficit position each and every year. And the deficit position next year is going to be in the neighborhood of about $140,000. And the more you expand it, the bigger your deficit gets. And sure, there's a way to get that money back, but I just don't approve of going to the taxpayer for that kind of money every time, because you don't want to look at another alternative plan. So it was voted and it passed 4-2. There was one person who isn't in the transportation function, so of course he did not vote on that, but there was 6 of us that voted and it was 4-2. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to items 12, information items. 12.1 is the Sechelt visitors statistics. If I could have somebody move receipt. Councillor Lutz and Councillor Shanks, actually. All those in favor? Any comments on the Sechelt visitor statistics that we have in front of us? And moving then to not related but similar, RCMP monthly crime statistics, item 12.2. Councillor Seegers and Councillor Lutz moving receipt. All those in favor? Any comments on the crime rates? And it has been a while since we've had anyone from the detachment come by, so we might want to invite Vishnell or some other member of the department. And items on council correspondence, items 12.3, a motion to receive all of those. Councillor Lutz and Seegers, all those in favor? And any items on the correspondence that people would like to pull? And Councillor Seegers?
Thank you. The second piece from Vancouver Coastal Health, there's a possibility for a grant, and I don't know if this has any bearing on what we're doing in our budget, but one of the things that's highlighted in there is active transportation. So given that we're doing trails, et cetera, I don't know if they would qualify, but they are considered active transportation. So perhaps staff could follow up on that and see if we could get some money for stuff that we're already doing.
Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I actually can respond that I participated in a conference call recently with Vancouver Coastal Health, the SCRD, and Gibson's, and the talk about combining the grant application into one larger one and dealing with active transportation along the entire Sunshine Coast. So there's talk about trying to find out what project might best meet everyone's needs. So that's in the works.
Good. I wasn't sure when it said minor capital expenditures are permissible, but major ones weren't. So if we can find a way to support that. And Councillor Shanks.
Yes, I just need clarification, Your Worship. Item number 8. Where is the apple orchard referred to in that particular piece of correspondence? Does anybody know? It's in West Sechelt, but I'm not sure where it is.
Well, we'll look to the planner to tell us where this is, because the opening sentence says West Sechelt.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they know what they're thinking. So Mr. Thompson.
So Apple Orchard Road is, I believe, what they're referencing in West Sechelt. It's off Emerson Road, north of Norwest Bay Road.
Okay.
Yeah, it's part of a fairly new subdivision, I think, that was only approved a few years ago. So I think they're still in the construction of homes on that road at the moment. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
And just before we leave that item, I was surprised to see a couple of items in the council correspondence which are basically bylaw related, and normally we don't see complaints and bylaw nature things in public correspondence all the time, because people write these letters not necessarily wanting to be identified because of repercussions. So, do you want to speak to that, or you don't have to? I mean, I just want to.
I just note that they were addressed to council, so that's the only reason they're on there.
Yeah. Okay, and Councillor Mueller?
If we're done from that, I just wanted to pull another one.
Yes.
Are we ready? Okay. Email number 4 from Kevin, I believe that's Kevin Crawford, regarding a boat that sunk in Porpoise Bay. And the only reason why I wanted to pull it is in the past, we've had this discussion and there hasn't been any resolutions passed by council regarding the derelict boats issue. It keeps coming up and people want us to do what we can to deal with it, but we're aware that it's a federal jurisdiction for the most part. But something that has been discussed by council was the issue of extending water leases. And perhaps now would be a time for council to pass a motion to direct staff to look into the issue of expanding water leases in Porpoise Bay and in surrounding waters to help deal with this issue at some point in the future.
Just before I entertain that motion, I'll ask, is the derelict boat issue on our, what we call the backlog of action items? Is it in that list of council resolutions and action items? I think it is. That's why, so I just don't want to duplicate it if it's there.
It is, Your Worship, and we were just made aware the other day that Public Works is in the process of, there is a new program through the Federal Ministry of Environment to assist with this issue. So there is some work being done by our Public Works staff. I don't have a full report at this time, but I assume something will come forward eventually to council.
Okay.
If I could just follow up on that, I recall that the package that I saw, it had it listed, but it had it crossed off because it wasn't part of our jurisdiction. So it is there, but it's basically been decided not to be dealt with.
And I think
through that avenue.
What Councillor Mueller is also saying is we don't want to just deal with the derelict boats. We want to find ways to have authority to prevent those problems before they come. So that's the motion that we should look for, is that staff explore all options to provide the District of Sechelt full authority to control the waterways within neighboring that all waterways that
border
adjacent to our jurisdiction, adjacent. That's what we want. Councillor Mueller would move that.
I'll move it.
Better said though. Can you say it again?
That's okay.
And Councillor Inkster will second it. Any discussion of that? Councillor Lutz, who's been working on it for a while, and then we'll look Councillor Mueller.
My understanding is bylaw has sent a list of the existing derelict boats and buoys and wharfs and floats to the federal government because there is a program that's being developed around that. The other thing, my question around this motion is, where does First Nations fit in as far as their jurisdiction?
I don't think we'd know exactly where they fit in, but I have discussed it with them, and I think anything that we approved would only be done in consultation. Councillor Mueller.
Yes, thank you. This particular issue, it's been a big issue on the coast for as long as I've been alive, and it's not going away. It reminds me a little bit of the issue of marijuana dispensaries and how it's been absolutely left to municipalities to deal with. We've had almost no real leadership on this issue, and so it's left with us to deal with the tools that we have. We don't tax for these purposes, but it's just unacceptable that such an issue would be impacting Sechelt in the way that it is. And I know we're not alone, but we're forced to deal with the solutions that we do have at hand, and the issue of water leases and that seems to be all we have. So we're left with that, and I think we have to do our best, but I'm really looking to the federal government to do something about this. It's on every single government's to-do list, but they don't do it, and there's a lot of simple tools that you could use.
Councillor Inkster. And then we'll call the motion.
Yeah, I mean, this has been talked about for a number of years, the derelict vessel problem throughout BC, and ABICC was involved, and I helped write a report on it to go to the federal government, but there wasn't a lot of action because they didn't want to commit the funds or get involved for whatever reason. But we do know of a most recent example, a number of council members know, and others in local government and those on Vancouver Island know how Ladysmith Harbor had a large boat dealt with by working with the federal government. And that was a much larger boat that then had to be grabbed and disposed of. So I'm sure if in fact there's appetite for it, we could work with the federal government to clear and or work quickly to deal with some smaller boats rather than a large boat that then needed disposal.
My experience is that our MP is very sympathetic and the federal government is slower than we are. Enough said. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you, and now I'd look for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Inkster. All those in favor? And we're adjourned. It was not the shortest meeting, but it is 8 o'clock, so that's relatively soon. So questions from the community, I see Pam, and then I'll look to the media if there's any clarifications, one at the back, so we'll start with Pam.